Dear friends and followers, today's question is a very important one. Joe, what and how does an ILS work? Now, first off, I had to make 3 separate episodes to cover the entire topic. So this is part 1, covering a basic understanding how an ILS is set up and its components. The second part is how to fly an ILS, and finally the different ILS categories, minimas and approach lighting systems. So let's get started on this very important topic.
1383, runway 27, clear takeoff. United 1538, number 927,
This video is brought to you by Squarespace. So what does ILS stand for? The I for instrument, the L for landing, and the S for system. So the instrument landing system is a ground-based radio navigation system giving pilots the lateral and the vertical guidance towards the runway, as they are in approach and IMC. To fly an ILS approach, the aircraft has to be fitted with an adequate ILS receiver to display and convert the picked up signals on the cockpit instruments. Now, besides that, you need the necessary ILS approach chart with important data like the ILS frequency and identifier code, the ILS inbound course and glide slope angle, the given minimum descent altitude or heights depending on the ILS category, and last but not least, the go-around procedure. Okay, now let's talk more about the ground-based system. Now the system consists of 2 antennas sending out on one tunable frequency. The so-called localizer antenna is normally located beyond the end of the runway and generally is built up out of several pairs of directional antennas. They send out radio signals in the horizontal axis of the runway. Let's look at this picture right here. The localizer antenna is emitting 2 lobes which are frequency modulated to 90 Hz on the left hand side of the runway centerline and 150 Hz on the right hand side. Now, just to get a better understanding of the localizer antenna, imagine each lobe would be a massive light beam. Now 90 Hz side would be a yellow light and the 150 Hz side would be a blue light. Now let's say you're slightly to the right of the runway center line, so the light you would be seeing is primarily blue, meaning you would have to fly more to the left where the light lobes overlap, creating a green light, and then you know you're on the center line. Obviously there is no such light besides the PAPI, but that's a whole nother story, but you get a understanding how to interpret the converted ILS signal on your ADI, your HSI or PFD. Now instead of colors you have this diamond indicating your position relative to the runway centerline. So if the diamond would be to the right, or let's say the runway centerline, you are left of it and have to correct your heading to the right to join the localizer, and vice versa. Also important to know, at the same time the localizer transmits the so-called ILS facility identification code. So what's that good for? Now, because the frequency range for the ILS is fairly small, you could pick up the wrong ILS frequency of a nearby airport. Therefore, each ILS sends out its own Morse code. For example, the ILS identification code for John F. Kennedy Airport, runway 04 right, is India Juliet Foxtrot Kilo, which will be displayed in your ILS receiver instrument, or you have to actually listen to the Morse code and compare it to the one on your ILS approach chart. Please comment below what type of airplane you're flying if you still have to self-tune the ILS frequency and listen to the Morse code. That'll be great, thanks. We have now established the lateral guidance towards the runway. Let's talk about the vertical axis. Now this axis is defined as the glide slope. Now the glide slope antenna is similar to the localizer antenna, only sending out the signals to the vertical axis towards the runway and is based perpendicular to the touchdown zone. Now imagine the light beam example I've mentioned a minute ago. It works the same, just at a 90-degree angle to the localizer beam. Now in most cases the glide slope angle towards the runway is 3 degrees, which is an angle presenting an adequate vertical descent rate in coherence with the approach speed, and it's shallow enough to constantly reduce your speed by extending slats, flaps plus the landing gear. But more about that in the next episode. So there's another diamond presented on your instrument showing your position relative to the glide slope. Now if the diamond is above the center, That'll give you the indication you are below the glide slope, so then you have to reduce the vertical speed or even level off to recapture the glide slope. If the diamond is below the center of the instrument, you're then too high, so again correct your vertical speed to rejoin the glide slope. Now this sounds easy, but be aware, if you pitch further down you gain speed, if you level off you reduce speed. So it's all a matter of pitch and power, and at the same time extending slats, flaps and doing ATC communications, so it's not that easy. Obviously there are glide slopes which are steeper, very often due to mountainous area or obstacle clearance limits which need to be met. For example, runway 24 at Naples, Italy is known for its steeper ILS approach than usual. And here comes a little contest. Which airport has the steepest published ILS approach in the world? The first correct answer gets pinned. Okay, we've now established the two main components of the ILS providing horizontal and vertical guidance towards the runway. But how do you know how far away from the runway threshold, which is absolutely essential for your speed management? Now let's say you're at 2,500 feet and you know the glide slope angle towards the runway, or you could quickly get out your calculator and do the math. All in bad weather and whilst monitoring your instruments, it's kind of difficult. So therefore, all the ILS systems have three marker points: the outer marker, the middle marker and the inner marker. So when flying over the outer marker, a little blue light will start flashing on your instruments and a corresponding beeping code can be heard. Comparing that with your map, you then know, okay, I'm passing the outer marker, you should have that altitude at that given distance. The outer marker and the middle marker are still out there, but I haven't heard an inner marker in a very long time. Nowadays there's a third antenna installed called the DME, Distance Measuring Equipment, which will give you a slant range towards the runway. Now making it a lot easier to monitor your distance, but your aircraft has to be fitted with the appropriate DME receiver and an instrument with which you have to tune in the corresponding DME frequency. But even better are the ILS which come with a built-in DME indication. If the letter D is prior to the identifier code, you know the ILS comes with a DME signal. The accuracy and the range of the ILS can vary from airport to airport, but all published ILS have to meet the standard ICAO Annex 10 guidelines, which are roughly 100 pages long. But generally speaking, the localizer shall be receivable with an accurate signal of at least 25 nautical miles from the runway threshold at plus minus 10 degrees to either side, at 17 miles plus minus 35 degrees, and if necessary at a 180 degree angle within the 10 nautical mile radius. At some airports you can also use the localizer back course or back beam, meaning you can approach the runway from the other side but without a glide slope indication though. But keep in mind, if your plane isn't fitted with an instrument capable of switching to the localizer back course approach, the indications will be the other way round. And the glide slope has its best accuracy at plus minus 8 degrees to either side of the runway centerline within a 10 nautical mile range. So I hope you enjoyed this basic introduction video of the ILS. Make sure to watch the next video on how to fly an ILS, regarding how to deal with wind and when to extend flaps and gears and much more. Thank you very much.